Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start off with introductions and then we'll get to our Q&A. So you're at the What's New in Chemistry grad admissions this year. And this discussion hour is sponsored by the ACS Analytical Education Committee. My name is Erin Gross. I'm at Creighton University and I'm a member of this committee. And I'll be co-moderating this with Betty Galaretta. I'll let Betty introduce herself or say hi, whatever you want to do, Betty.
Hi, everybody. I'm Betty Galarreta. I'm also a member of this committee, and I'm from Peru, from Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. Welcome, everybody.
And Betty will be monitoring the chat. If people want to put questions in the chat, we have pre-submitted questions we'll go to, and anyone on this Zoom can ask us any questions. I just want to recognize other people from our committee who are here, and someone who can't be here, our fearless leader, Michelle Kovarik, who is busy at this time, but she really helped do a lot of the legwork getting this organized. And then I know I've seen Maria and Dan, if you want to just say hi, thank you for being here. And now I'm going to get to our panelists. So we have four of them that you can see on this title slide. I'm going to let Nick go first, and then I think the other three have some slides that we'll go to. So go ahead, Nick.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Nick Riley. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry at University of Washington. My group does a lot of research in like the mass spec and bioanalytical world, so very much in that kind of analytical space. And we think a lot about glycoscience too. So we do some chemical biology. So if you have questions specific to that, happy to address those. But like broadly at University of Washington, we have roughly 250 graduate students, and we have a pretty robust research portfolio across inorganic, organic, analytical, and physical. So happy to share, a lot about questions you have, and I can share specifics about how our program will operate this year. As we are, getting details coming together. I think a lot of us, as you'll see, have admissions deadlines and things like that are like around December. So, all questions that you have, if I don't have a slide with specifics yet, but happy to discuss as we go.
Thanks, Nick. And I will click ahead to Aaron Baker's slide.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Erin Baker. I'm from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I'm going to be the incoming Director of Graduate Studies in the Chemistry Department, which is a little frightening, and it'll be good though. I keep saying that. I wanted to put this up on a slide because I know this is what's new in a graduate world this year, but it's completely changing every day. And so we're facing another year of uncertainty in graduate student acceptances. And depending on what the different programs do and how the grants go, situations can change daily. So you guys are in kind of a world of flux right now. One of the things I really wanted to emphasize, though, are some of the things for your best chances of acceptance and things you really should focus on for your materials. And so, like Nick said, know your priority application dates, because those priority application dates for each school can be different, and they're very important for getting your application in front of that reviewer committee in a normal time, because late applications, because things are so competitive, will be knocked down. Make sure you have 3 very strong letter writers, because each letter is going to be essential. So if you have one person that doesn't know you very well and is going to write a really short letter, that can hurt your chances of acceptance. And then throughout your application, some of the 4 things that we commonly look for in a rubric when we're evaluating are that you have undergrad research experience and that you describe it with specific details so the reviewers know that you understand your undergrad research experience. You have independent contributions. So what have you specifically done? And that shows your leadership. Also highlight all awards. If you have any awards, that can help set you apart. So even if it's like a departmental award or a small award, put that in your application. And then if there's any publications that you might be involved in, even if they're going to be published in the next year or so, just say, I'm also a contributor to this publication and the reason why. The other big thing with ours this year is that make sure you show strong writing skills, but make sure they don't look AI generated, because there's thoughts of applications being assessed with AI content devices. So make sure that you're not trying to make the AI person do all your work. And a big asterisk on the bottom is know that waitlists are a reality this year due to the reduced allowed acceptances. So if you get put on a wait list, don't feel super sad. Talk to your program and talk about what that wait list means. So I'll pass it on to the next person.
Right. Thanks, Erin. A lot of great advice there. Right. Got Renee.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Renee Frontiera. I am a director of graduate studies at the University of Minnesota, and I've been involved in admissions one way or another for my 13 years on the faculty here. And I agree with everything the other two panelists have said so far. I wanted to highlight a few changes that we decided to make over a month ago to our graduate application process this year. And I think this is important to be aware of, and hopefully you're getting very clear information from all the schools that you're looking at. Our application is also due December 1st, as normal, and we are anticipating a similar or slightly smaller class size than normal. Obviously, this is very hard to predict. Our main priority is being able to support any graduate student in our program for the full time in grad school through TA and RA-ships, and so that relies a lot on federal funding for research. But this is currently what we're projecting based on information that we have, which is, you know, all the information that you have. What's required is similar as always, although this year we're trying something different. We would like to ask you to include a video. And the reason for this is we think this is a good chance for you to practice your communication skills in multiple ways. We think this is a good chance for us to, as Erin mentioned, separate out some AI generated or suspected AI generated personal statements. And we really want to hear from you yourself about, you know, what you love about research and hear you tell us about that. We have 3 specific questions that are on our website that we want to see you answer in this video. I'm happy to take any questions anybody has about this. We're trying this. We want to see if it will help us have more information in this, and it's sort of another opportunity for you to sell yourself. One thing I do want to note about this video is we don't want to see people's faces. We want to hear you. We don't want to see you to try and mitigate any kind of bias we might have in evaluating these videos. And so this is something that we're trying. We have heard of other schools talking about trying this, but I haven't heard final decisions from a lot of places. But you can find all the details on our website. Another thing that we're doing is we are going to go to conditional offers for students who are currently residing in the US. So even if you are an international student, but you're currently in the US, we want you to come visit. And our offers will be converted to full offers after the visit. And this is very similar to what's done in biology programs or biochemistry programs. We want to try this year. Part of the reason why is, you know, last year was very hard for many reasons. For us specifically at Minnesota, we saw like a 40% increase in the number of applicants, and we're not really sure why that is. And so we really need to carefully control our class size. We need to make sure that we have the ability to support everyone in our program. And so as Erin mentioned, we hope to not go to waitlist this approach, but that might be a possibility because we're really committed to making sure that once people move here, you know, move across the country or whatever for grad school, that we're able to support them the whole time. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Renee. And all right.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan Gazelter. I'm the chair of Notre Dame's Chemistry and Biochemistry Department, which is a job I've had since July 1st. So I'm relatively new at this. In a previous life, I actually was the director of graduate admissions for our department. So some of this is based on prior knowledge. All the previous panelists have had great advice. We are in a very similar position to all the other schools. We're expecting to have a smaller class than normal next year. Last year's class was admitted class is very large. And for reasons that we all, like Renee said, we don't fully understand. But like Renee said, we also want to make sure that we can support and find labs and advisors for all of the students that are in our program, and have funding throughout their time in graduate school. So for that reason, just like all the other programs have said, we're making some changes this year. Unlike previous years, our visits are really more like interviews than previous years. So this is common in biology programs and some other biochemistry departments. So the time frame has also been accelerated forward. Our deadline is formally December 15th for applications, but we're going to start Zoom interviews for around a pool of 60 people starting December 1st. So even before the deadline for the full applications, we'll be starting some Zoom interviews. We're going to invite around 40 students for a very early campus visit at the end of January. And then after that campus visit, we're going to have an initial set of rolling offers. It's not the full set of offers though. So if we haven't made our class by March and there's still openings, there may be offers that come late. So other places are calling this wait lists, but for us, it's just going to be a sort of a rolling set of offers. What we're looking for in students is the same thing as everybody else, which is strong research experience and documentation of that, either in the form of a letter from a research advisor or papers or, conference presentations, things like that. That trumps almost everything else. And beyond that, what courses you've taken, were they hard, appropriate courses? How did you do in them? And then do your research interests match what we've got going on here? And do your institutional interests match what we've got going on here? I'll stop there.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for the introductions, all of our panelists. And I'm going to stop sharing this for now so we can all see each other. And so students, faculty advisors, please, ask a question. You can do the hand raise or ask it in the chat. Betty will be monitoring the chat, and I'll go to the pre-submitted questions. I think some of those slides answered some of those, but go ahead if anyone has any questions. And I'm going to go pop that link from Dan's PowerPoint into the chat as well for anybody. So. Yes, thanks. And yeah, use the chat to introduce yourself or just say hi. Can we answer any questions?
Are we doing questions in chat only or hands up?
Oh, either one. I'll monitor the verbal questions and Betty's going to monitor the chat. So yeah, Tony, do you have a question?
Yes. Hi, I'm Tony Bell. I'm the Department Chair of Physical and Environmental Sciences, Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania. And I'm also a chemistry professor and taught chemistry for 29 years. And so we have a great group of undergrads here. We don't have a graduate program. We have a great group of undergraduates who will be out there looking for graduate school admission. But one thing I wanted to ask, we have a very robust undergraduate research program here where students work directly with faculty because we don't have graduate students. And so I'm assuming that when you're wanting undergraduate research and details, you're not wanting results before they're ready to be published, but you're wanting to know that they know about their project and the foundation of their project. That's what I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll take that one. That totally correct. We just want to know that basically they know the hypothesis of what they're trying to study and that they're clear on that. Sometimes we'll get people say, "Oh, we did undergrad research on rats or something," and then you're like, "But why?" The whys and stuff. So it's just going a little deeper into what they're doing and why.
Right. Thank you.
Any other panelists want to add anything or?
Yeah, do you want us to raise our hand, Aaron, or what do you want to call on us? Okay.
Anything is fine. We'll make sure everyone gets a chance. But
Okay,
yeah.
I just want to say what I always tell people is we look that people made the most of the research opportunities that are available to them. So we recognize that not everyone has the same opportunities. We want to see people that are seeking them out and making the most of that. And so there's no minimum requirement for publications or anything like that, right? It's what are you doing with the research? And as Erin said, can you talk about it in a way that demonstrates you were really involved intellectually?
Yeah, I also will add that I think that's a good opportunity for talking about the specifics, because that helps when we're reading as faculty who are interested in, or knowing that students are interested in our work, to say like, oh, they've done research with this big picture question, but they used these techniques, or they did some kind of approach to an experiment that could really resonate well with the types of experiments we have in mind. That helps us understand where they could fit in, and like what their strengths are, what background they have, I think too.
Thanks, Nick. I see a lot of questions pouring in. Let's see. First, I saw one in the chat from Greg, and then we'll get to Annette and Dan, and then Blaze. So we'll get that order. I don't know, Betty, do you want to read Greg's, or I can do it too? I don't care.
Sure, I can read it.
Thanks, Betty.
So with more of that on-campus visits being more interview-like, how should we advise our students about this?
I can maybe take that. Yeah, so I think the students should have done their homework on who they might be meeting with, and have good questions and good interactions with the faculty that they meet. So the on-campus visits are they're gonna go around and talk to 4 or 5 different faculty members and visit with grad students in a group and have a graduate student host, sort of like the normal visits. But we're going to be polling the faculty after the visit to say, would this person be a good match for our program? And if you've had good questions for that, that faculty member, then you're going to get, the check mark. So I think that's engagement with the faculty that you're talking to is the main thing.
Anyone want to add to that? Okay, I think Greg gives that a thumbs up. And Annette, I think I saw your hand up next.
Hi, hi, Annette Rigosa, chemistry faculty member here at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University in Central Minnesota. I have sort of a logistical question in terms of the timeline. I know, and typically there's like this April 15th deadline where students have to all sort of make their decisions and all of that. Are you anticipating that changing potentially per institution or as sort of as a whole? Or is that sort of still sort of the last day for them to officially commit and so on and so forth?
I could take a stab at that. So my understanding is that universities enter into this agreement and we are not allowed to break that agreement. And so the April 15th deadline is for us to be part of this sort of collaborative effort amongst all universities. I believe all the universities represented here have signed it for sure. But I think it's a really good question because especially if there are going to be waitlist situations, students are going to end up in tough situations and they're going to be waiting to hear. And so my main recommendation is to be very proactive and communicative with whoever is sending the offer. If they are on a wait list, they can ask, how high am I? Am I likely to get a spot? We understand this and we want to do everything we can to give them the info they have to make a good decision. We also can't, admit hundreds more than we have room for. And so just open communication is the best thing that can happen. If a student is on the wait list, that means the university wants to take them. And then I think, for the community, if people have decided, they help others by committing and turning down open offers. And that's altruistic, but that would help this situation.
Yeah, I just want to add, we had to go into the wait list last year just because we didn't know what to do with the situation. And so some of the people that were on our wait list didn't receive yeses until after the April 15th date, because we, like Renee said, it was really nice if people will turn down the offer, but a lot of people just be deciding up to the deadline. So we don't know how many people have accepted to our program or not. And so then we were trying to give waitlist answers like the 16th, 17th, so those people would know. But it's hard.
Absolutely. No, and I completely understand how sort of up in the air everything is, but also from our perspective, it's been challenging to advise students when it's April and they're like, I haven't heard anything from any of the institutions that I've applied to, or certain schools that I've applied to. So it's helpful to hear that that deadline still exists, but it has become a bit flexible just because of the nature of the complexity of everything. So that's really helpful. My other question that I had, actually, Jim Tong put in the chat and phrased it really well. So just as a leading to his eventually, but thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I had Dan's hand up next, then we'll go to the few in the chat. So Dan's also, I want to acknowledge you as one of our Analytical Education Committee members as well. So hi, Dan.
Hi, yeah, it's been a while since I've been able to hop on. It's been pretty busy here. I'm also at Commonwealth University, like Tony. I just had a question about the AI, well, scanning for AI content, 'cause that's a big thing right now, and I know that there's a lot of discussions about it. Would a student who potentially gets flagged as that, would they have an opportunity to know that they were flagged? I know based on some history of at least reading students' assignments that I know they wrote, some of them have very interesting and unique ways of expressing themselves. And it would be, I guess, at least helpful to know if we have a student who might be struggling in that area. Oh, a lot of schools have flagged them. Maybe we can work on that or help them out somehow.
Yeah, I'll hop on because I noted that first in my slide. So they probably won't get notified that they were AI flagged just because we have so many applications. Because yeah, for our department last year for analytical, we had 130 applications and we could only accept 20. And so that gives us, 110 applications that we probably can just say no to, and you won't hear why there was a no. And it's really unfortunate. It's just yeah, there's just so much for numbers. It's hard.
Probably the same thing at other programs. You just get so many applications. It's hard to. All right, thanks. I'll let Betty read through some of the chat questions.
Yeah, so the next question comes from Blaze. She says, she or he, sorry, is a student from University of Dallas. And the question is, how should we reach out to professors if we're interested in learning what their graduate research projects are?
I can start that, and I think there will probably be a lot of input on that one. But I think, I mean, one classic way is email, and so I think looking through research websites and publications are a great place to start understanding what's going on. And then email to say, like, I saw this, something specific that you saw is a really useful way to start a conversation. Because we as PIs or professors, we do get a fair number of emails of, I'm broadly interested in your research. But it's much easier to respond when it's like I saw this and I want to know more about this specific thing, or will this project have a follow-up, or something that is a much more direct question that someone can answer that can then lead to a longer conversation. Or it also could be a great way for a professor to say, well, let me connect you with the student who led that project, and you can talk more with them about what it took or where it's going and things like that. And so I think giving a specific way or a specific talking point to respond to in an email is much more helpful for everyone than a generic, I'm interested in your research program. I think the one thing to expect is you probably won't get very long responses of where projects are going, just for a bandwidth issue. So that's why I think having one specific question can lead to then a longer discussion. But that first response that you get back probably won't have like, here's 6 projects and their full like scope of what they are. And that, so I think helping you frame out what type of conversation you want to have through the question you ask will help quite a bit.
I think to add to that, it's helpful to know if the graduate program admits to the department or to individual groups. If your student's applying to a program that admits to the department, writing to the faculty doesn't really help very much. But what would be helpful is actually in the personal statement, mentioning 3 or 4 faculty who have research interests that overlap with the student and why they overlap with the student. So faculty get a lot of email. They don't respond very well to. They don't respond sometimes at all, even to when their chair writes to them. So having an unknown student write to them may not be as satisfying or helpful, but actually putting some details into the statement, I think, is helpful.
Can I add, Dan, I don't want to interrupt anyone else, but for our application, I know a lot of departments, students are required to name 3 professors and talk about specifically why their research could be interesting. And so I agree that that is an effective way to kind of get attention for like, these are people I'm interested in. And even using that as a launch point, again, there's no guarantee that the email will be productive, but that could be like I saw that for the application, I need to put 3 professors and you're one that I'm interested in. Is this type of project something I can write about? Like even something that directed can be a helpful way to connect. But I agree with Dan that email that's certainly not a guaranteed way to get communication back.
I wanted to add on to that for your applications too. Like Nick was saying, you're supposed to name 3 professors. Make sure that you name 3 research active professors. So make sure that lets us know that you've actually looked into their research, because we've had people name people that are emeritus and people that are naming like research professors that aren't taking students. Like they say on their site they're not taking students, and that's like one way that we can tell that you might not be as serious as we would want you to be.
Can I add one? Like, I think it's a great point, Erin.
Add more.
Yeah, and I think thinking about why that is important for admissions committees too is we now have a more limited pool of students we can admit. We have to, if it's an umbrella or like a cohort program where it's not direct admit to a lab, we're trying to maximize potential for students to find a home and be supported with research. And so if you put 1 professor who is definitely looking to take students, but you put 2 who are not, that the challenge, even if you're an outstanding applicant, is like, well, can we make sure that we can find support for you, even if that 1 professor ends up not being able to take you as a student. And so making sure that you are writing about people that we like, oh, broadly, this could work well, really helps us, not just from like the science perspective, but also just the logistics perspective. And again, as Erin said, like the legwork that you've taken to do that research, really, it shows. It's very noticeable when students have put the effort in to kind of know what they're looking for.
Can I just add a couple of suggestions along those lines? Because I really agree. So, sometimes it can be hard to tell who is research active. Many universities have this on the department webpage, so you might need to go there to the list of faculty. But I think also maybe a good metric is to just go to Google Scholar and, have they published in the past year, and or set some sort of benchmark for you, so that you can decide. And I also think, the research, your personal statement is a really good opportunity to advocate for yourself and show that you can do your homework, that you're going to work hard. And I think in the past, people typically kind of like list 3 faculty and some kind of general words of what they're interested in. And we would like this to be really specific. We would like a chance for you to show that you've read the papers, that you can tell us about them, that you can tie in something about your past to why you think this would be interesting. And so, we don't need summaries of the papers. We can use AI to do that, or we probably know what we wrote, but, actually doing the homework. And then one thing I was gonna say is like 5% of the ones we get, people attach the wrong school to their personal statement. So we get a lot of, I really want to go to University of Michigan because, and just double check. We know you're applying to a lot of places, but if you're doing that work, make sure it gets to the right place.
Thanks, everybody. That's great advice. And I just want to point out, Maria Lieberman, also from Notre Dame, has some good tips in the chat as well about researching faculty members. And then I'll let Betty get our last Jim's question in the chat. Then Jake and Christian, we see your hands up too as well.
Yeah, Jim Tang he's an industry member, and he asks, well, he gives just some options. For each of the admissions committee members, do you anticipate your entering class to be less than 50%, 75 to 90%, or 90 to 100% of your fall 2023 entering class?
I can start, and I think there's like a B option right in between. So we don't know yet, and normally we don't know at this time of the year, just to like calm everyone down. So our current first year class is still deciding on research groups. That happens for us in the next week or two. And that really is going to impact what faculty think about taking students next year. And so that matters. And then also, like everybody, we want a congressional budget. We want to know what the funding will be for science next year. We were really hoping we would have that by December 1st. And I think we might have to make decisions without it. And so this is an ongoing discussion, but I think in Minnesota, we would be in the B or C category, kind of depending.
So
Yeah.
the reference is for fall 2023. So that's back a couple of years. We're between A and B for this coming year. I think we're significantly smaller.
Yeah, University of Washington, we're A. We're going to be less than 50% of our 2023 class, but we also took a smaller class last year. So we're more in line with kind of the about 50%. Last year, the 2024 class, 2025 class was a little over half of what we took in 2023. So that difference there, we're probably staying closer to what we took last year. So, but definitely a decrease from, the historical numbers that you would see from 2022, 2023 type of cohorts.
Yeah, and UNC is similar to like Renee said, is we have no idea right now. We're accepting our first year students the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And as soon as that happens, then we poll our faculty members and ask how many they would be interested in for the next year. And then we make that number for our grad acceptance, our different divisions to accept on those. So I don't have a good value. I know that we've been luckier with grants than we thought we would be. So the personnel are actually pretty optimistic. So I'm guessing we'll be in that B-ish range too. I just have no idea, and I won't know till probably the first week of December.
All right, thanks, everybody. That's a great question. And I see Jake with his hand up.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, so my name is Jake Oren. I'm a sophomore biochemistry student. I currently attend Ursinus College, which is in Collegeville, PA, right around Philadelphia. My question today is, I work currently in a microbiology research lab, and I think that is really important for me for like vaccine, possibly grad school research type. My question today is, what is the difference, for me coming from a smaller D3 liberal arts school? Like, how does that affect the competitiveness of my application for like a bigger school like, UNC or Notre Dame or something like that, as to someone who comes from a bigger school to start with, like a Penn State or Drexel or Penn or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because that's I think a lot of people are really worried about that of like, oh, if I'm in a smaller school. We've actually found that some of our best students are from small schools because they get that really tight undergrad experience that sometimes the bigger schools aren't able to give in classes that are huge. So we have no discrepancy against school size, class size. We really just look at your application and we say, do they know what they were doing in their undergrad? Like, and can they portray that message? And then what did the people that work with them say about them? Like those letters of rec are really important. So yeah, don't worry about coming from a smaller place. We judge everybody equally, and sometimes we're actually really excited about the smaller schools, even more so.
Yeah, Jake, I wanted to agree, and I myself am from a school of 1,800 students, so I totally agree with Aaron. One thing too to think about, you said you're a sophomore doing research, like that's fantastic, and so that sets you up very well. You could also think about applying to RU programs, just so you could see what it's like at a big research institute over like a summer research program. But there's definitely no hindrance coming from a small school.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to echo Aaron pretty much completely. Like there's really no preference. It's more about kind of like your ability to discuss your research. And I would say if we had to look down the line of which big school or small school most of our students come from, it's probably slightly more that come from smaller schools.
I'm going to agree with Nick. A big chunk of our graduate population came from small schools or, second state schools, and we get a big group of students from Grand Valley State in Michigan. We're happy with students who come from, not the large D1s.
Right, thanks, Jake. That's a great question. Thanks, everybody. And we'll take Christian's question now and then go to the chat.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, so I'm Christian. I'm a junior at Gettysburg College, so another small Pennsylvania school, and I'm a junior right now, so looking to apply next fall. But I was thinking because Aaron really emphasized like having strong letters of recommendation, and I'm a chemistry and German major, so I was kind of wondering like, should my letters of recommendation come from STEM professors, or could I potentially ask professors from like other departments or on-campus jobs and that sort?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's you want somebody that really knows you and worked with you. You need to have one from your research, your undergrad research faculty advisor. If that one's not there, that's like a red flag for us, like right away of like, I don't know why their faculty advisor isn't recommending them. Your other recommendations don't necessarily have to be STEM. Maybe you would want your second one to be STEM, but a third one that shows like leadership qualities and like a hardworking type is going to be a really good letter too.
Yeah, again, I'll find myself seconding Aaron. Just as someone who had 2 letters from STEM and 1 from not STEM, as when I applied to graduate school, I think being really intentional with whoever the non-STEM writer could be of like, these are the qualities I'd really want to be emphasized in the letter. Do you think you could write a letter that could talk about those things? Because I'll have my science from other letter writers, I really want to make sure that I can show off this quality that you would have witnessed in me. And so being intentional about and like communicating kind of what their letter could add to your application, I think is really important, but certainly very doable without one of the letter writers being kind of STEM focused.
Great question, Christian. I love that you're in front of a whiteboard too. And I'll let Betty take over the chat, and then Ryan, we'll get to you next.
Yeah, so the next question comes from Ellie Grace. So this is another important document they have to submit is, and she asked if, could you touch more about personal statements? Mainly what common mistakes you might see or things you see that stand out to you or things to avoid. Thank you.
Can I take a brief stab at this. One of the things that I used to jump out at me about personal statements is some students write them like they're college application essays, and they really aren't. So I think it was Aaron or from UNC who talked about discussing research projects and what your role in them had been. That's a lot more important than knowing about, what kind of high school you went to. So the essays are a lot different than the sort of confessional style that's in the college application essay. And they really can be kind of matter of fact about, here's why I want to pursue a PhD. Here's my background. Here's the things I did. Here's the people I want to work with at your institution. So.
Yeah, I can add, I totally agree with that. I think, you don't need to start with a tragic story or a quote or anything like that. You can if that feels authentic to you. But what we're looking for is we want people who will be successful in our graduate program. And success can be defined in a lot of ways. And so this is your chance too to think about that. Like what does success in grad school mean? Obviously means getting a PhD, but how and why and how do you want to contribute and in what ways? And so this is a way to tell us about what your goals are, how you've been setting yourself up to achieve those goals, and why the specific institution is a good fit for that. And we know you're writing a lot of these. I think this year especially, focusing on that institutional fit is going to help set apart that letter. So do some homework there and tell us why. And I think, kind of going with the AI theme, being very specific, being very detailed is very helpful. It's probably impossible for us to distinguish AI written letters from generic letters, but really specific ones stand out. And so that would be my main advice.
Yeah, I would agree. And like some of the AI context, they like over exaggerate. So that's don't over exaggerate like AI does. Like be realistic because it's like I'm the most brilliant person. Like that'll be an easy like, oh, they AI'd this type of thing. But I just want to add that because there's a few kind of AI trigger words that are really easy if you've looked at a lot of AI stuff.
And the last thing I'll add, I agree that emphasizing the research fit and institutional fit is the most important thing. If you want to add more to talk about, your perspective or like have something that stands out additionally, beyond that, first and foremost, research fit. But also I think saying like, I know graduate school takes ambition or resilience or whatever. And like, here's why I think I have the resilience to do it or the ambition to do it, and give an example that you can then, point to. That can be a way to make yourself stand out. It also gives specifics that helps, show that it's not AI. But I don't think, kind of going back to Dan's point, like I don't think you want to focus on that in per se, because then it becomes too much more like a college application letter. But including something of like, I know graduate school takes, whatever you want to discuss, and like I can demonstrate that I have that quality through this experience I've had, that can really help it stand out too.
Yeah, the biggest mistake on those is what Renee said earlier, is saying the wrong institution and the wrong professors that you want to work for, because right away your application goes in a separate pile, because we know that basically you didn't take enough time to submit to the right university, so we don't know if your details or your attention to details is going to go.
All right. Thanks. I'll let Betty do Casey's question, and then we'll go back over to Ryan with his hand up.
Sure. Casey Camps asked, with a typical timeline of current first-year students selecting groups by the end of the fall semester, the current government funding shutdown landscape, should students not expect acceptances in late December, early January this year?
So I would say we plan to be probably a week later than normal. We always aim to get ours out by December 20th, and that's going to be ambitious, we think, just given the expected increase in applicants because the economy is bad. And so, but that's still on track for early January. I think most visit weekends I've heard will still be in January and February, and so we can't really go much later.
Yeah, UNC will have decisions about mid-January, January 15th-ish is I think when we usually put out decisions. And our visit weekend, we haven't switched to an interview. Ours is actually gonna be hopefully a happy weekend. We'll see. We have two, one in early March and one in late March.
We'll have our invitations for the campus visit in sort of mid-January, early to mid-January, but the offers won't come out until like early February. And then they'll be rolling, so it'll take a while.
Yeah, we typically try and have some at least information from our end settled by the end of the year. And so whether this year kind of, as has been alluded to, depending on number of applications, late December, early January is what we're aiming for. But that's kind of hopefully that's where it ends up. But our visit weekend also is scheduled for mid-February and is not changing. So it kind of we're still constrained by that timeline, as others have said too. And I think I'll add, it was mentioned near the beginning of this that, the priority deadlines or the deadlines that are posted are really important. And that's because I think a lot of us, as soon as that deadline hits, we start collating applications and reading things. And so making sure you're on time is pretty critical, especially in a year where we have more applicants and things like that too.
Right. Thanks, everybody. So students stay on top of those deadlines. Each school is a little different, so just keep track of that and get stuff in early. So, which is what we usually recommend every year. Get your stuff in early, then they know you're serious. So, all right, Ryan.
Hi, I am a senior chemistry major at Creighton University, so I'm actually applying to UMN right now, and so this was kind of why I'm at this panel. My main question is, when it comes to research experience, I come from a biochemistry background. I've been working with my PI for like 3 years now at this point, and biochemistry and computational chemistry research, but I'm kind of more interested now, I think, now that I'm at a different level in my like undergraduate career, I want to switch to like physical and instrumental chemistry. Um, is that a detractor because I'm wanting to change disciplines at all or anything? Or I'm not really sure.
That's an awesome thing. It means you've thought about what you want to do and you have some reasons behind it and stand by it proudly. That's great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say definitely not an issue at all. And I think even articulating the interest in like, where it started, how it developed, and why you want to pursue a new kind of research direction is super helpful. It makes your research statement also quite memorable when you can talk about like, this is what I've done, and now I really want to pursue this new angle that I learned about. That's a good thing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, panelists. And let's see. I think one more. I think we have a follow-up from Casey in the chat.
Yeah, there is one more. So Professor Baker mentioned that it is a red flag if a research advisor is not writing a recommendation letter for a student. With the uncommon turnover of faculty over the last year, if a student's research professor left a program or a school, can other letter writers discuss this in their letter of recommendation to help remove this red flag?
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely. And then the student should also discuss it in either their research statement or their personal statement, because when we read through, we highlight the name of their research advisor and then look in the letters to look for that. So as long as the student discusses that, then that'll take that question away of like, my research advisor decided to go to Antarctica because things suck right now, or, but, and I wanted to, and then I worked with somebody else, or somebody else can write to that will help us.
Right. Thanks for the follow-up. We have maybe, I guess about 7-8 minutes left. Any last questions or thoughts? I think we're all caught up in the chat. I see Tony, go ahead.
Back onto me. So with more high school students during early college, I'm going to be having students graduating with degrees in chemistry younger than I've ever had before. I'll have one graduating in the spring who will be 17 years old. Amazing, outstanding student. So is there a concern about somebody's age? Because she's like very mature and real. Obviously, she'd have to be honor student in chemistry. So outstanding. But are there concerns with anybody with age, especially since there may be some like work restrictions, or I don't know how that works actually. So does anybody have any insight on that? We have.
Yeah, we actually admitted a 17-year-old a few years ago. And everybody working with a minor needs background checks, but usually that's done anyway, like through outreach events and things like that. So, addressing the maturity seems important and the research experience, but that wouldn't raise any particular red flags.
Yeah, awesome. She's going to make somebody a top-notch graduate student, so and PhD.
That's awesome. I would agree with that, Renee. If they're below 16, though, that's when we start having trouble. So 16 gets really tricky to bring people into the lab.
All right, well, we're once again all caught up, so I'll just put out another call. Oh, I see Ellie Grace has a question.
Hello. Oh, sorry. I just had a question about, you mentioned some students getting waitlisted and then potentially getting off the wait list. I was wondering if you did your application at the priority deadline, but you got waitlisted, and then if you got unwaitlisted, would you get like the same funding and benefits as other people accepted on the priority deadline?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we did last year. Is waitlisted were considered as no different than the other students as soon as they received their offer letter. So it was just that we could only accept a certain amount, and we wanted to put a couple extra right on the wait list in case like a bunch of the other students decide to go to other schools or something, and we were able to pull them into our program. And we really, like Renee said, I think we really want those students in our program. We want to make sure that they're successful, they can find groups, and so we don't want to bring in anybody that's going to leave after a year because they can't find a group either because nobody has funding for them to support them.
And once you're in our program, you're a graduate student in our program. There's no difference from when you applied. We don't even remember that. So
Yeah, I'll just confirm we're the same. It doesn't matter at what stage you receive the offer is going to look the same.
Yeah, same. And I think too, usually the faculty won't even know sort of where that happens. And so you can just put that out of your mind forever, I think. We want everyone to be receiving the same compensation in grad school for the same work, obviously.
Yeah, it's only our reviewers know who's waitlisted. Nobody knows beyond that. And yeah, once people are in, they're considered the same and everybody forgets.
All right, thank you, everybody. We just have a few minutes left, so I'll do one more call for questions, or if our panelists, or even Maria, who's a grad school professor, any last advice for students and or faculty advisors? Because yes, like Tony just said, some of us haven't done the grad school thing in a long time. So this helps us faculty advisors just have more confidence and give better advice to our students. Students, I hope this helped you. I see a hand up.
Hi, yeah, I'm a faculty member at a small institution. So if you're taking fewer graduate students sort of for several years, and it sounds like people are, does that mean that when they get there, they're going to be doing more teaching as a graduate student? Like they might have to do it for 2 or 3 years because you don't have as many graduate students coming in, or how is that going to be impacting things? Thank you.
I can jump in first because our program is ones that I mentioned we downsized. I think it's actually somewhat of an opposite, that we are also, with all that's going on, there are fewer TA spots in addition. So this is one of the reasons that some programs are changing their graduate size. And I can't speak, of course, other panelists talk about their programs, but this is a constant, give and take situation of how many TA lines are there to fund, what faculty have RA support that they can provide, and how do we make sure that any student that comes into the program does have support. So I think it's definitely less about having to TA more and more scaling class sizes to support that exists. That helps kind of frame that a little differently.
Yeah, I'll agree with Nick, and I'll say, to date, our biggest impact on our budget has been a reduction in TA lines rather than a change in research funding. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball for next year, but research grants are usually at least 3 years in duration, and so that says something about most of our changes in class size are actually coming from changes in the university budget and TA lines, but that's maybe why we're targeting a pretty similar class size.
Our reduction in class size has a lot to do with how large our class was last year. So we don't expect there to be a change in how much a student has to TA because some of last year's students are going to be TAing for a little bit longer. But for the incoming students, I think it's going to be about the same as normal.
Right, thanks. I just see one last question in the chat. Maybe we'll do this and then we'll wrap things up. I know everybody's busy or wants to start their weekend.
Yeah, I will ask a final question is, before COVID, I always advise students to apply to at least 6 programs with a caveat that typically a student gets into 30% of their application. Does anyone have an estimate of what is the percentage nowadays? Essentially, how many schools should a strong candidate apply to ensure they have a shot of getting into 2?
This is a really good and really hard question. I mean, I'm advising my current undergrads about this too, right? And I think maybe a key takeaway is it's going to be harder to get into grad school this year. There's a lot of compounding factors. And so I think students really need to think about, a safety school, and is that something they really want to go to, or somewhere they want to go, or do they want to wait a year or two and see if things get better? But I don't think anybody can actually predict this. And that's sort of why we're changing admissions, is we also use metrics like this to figure out what's the likelihood of people accepting offers. And last year, those were just like blown out of the water. So we don't know.
I actually think that this a strong student should maybe have a range of schools, that there might be, more than just the reach schools and places, a safety school, like, not flood the zone, but have a range of schools that would have research interests that match the students' interests.
I'm also advising 2 of my undergrads for grad schools right now, and I'm telling them 8. So apply to 8 with maybe some safety schools in there. I don't know if that's a good number. We have no ideas, but that's kind of what I'm giving them for advice, because I think if they can get their feelers out to as many schools as possible, hopefully they'll be able to get in.
Yeah, I think this is also part of the complicated calculus of, if we have more people applying and wait lists and how many people have applied to different schools, like it will be complicated. So I don't know that the percentage or return rate that we've been relying on, kind of as Renee said, like last year was completely different, like calculus as far as that went. And so I do think applying to more, as I've said, is a smart idea, but also on the back end, then that means that there are more people that could be taking up spots, et cetera, that if they have 10 places they're applying to get into X number, it's just going to be complicated.
I think we are running out of time. So unfortunately, hopefully we will have more time, but we want to again thank very much to Renee, to Dan, to Erin and Nick for such a great conversation. I think everybody got several of the questions solved out. And thank you everybody for joining us. And please stay tuned for more activities, more discussion hours that we will have on the Analytical Chemistry Education Committee. Thank you very much, Erin, for hosting this. And thank you all. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Betty. Thanks to all the panelists. Everyone have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for moderating.
All right, thanks, guys.